Good afternoon, or at least I'm assuming it's afternoon that you're watching this. As promised, here is the video for the art appreciation lecture and PowerPoint. And ideally, I will have time also to go over the art exploration task that you guys are going to be doing through the Google Arts and Culture website. Just so you know how to access this, okay? This is your course page. Click the drop down for the philosophy and the aesthetic, and then you go underneath PowerPoints and notes from lectures. And it is right here, art appreciation PowerPoint. It might take a while to download, that's annoying, but hopefully this video suffices as we go through it. So, I like to plug and say this background picture, which has been darkened, you can't really see how colorful it is something by my mom. So she's an artist, and it's one of the reasons that I love art. I grew up with art, and so I've always had an appreciation for color and shape and the aesthetic, and so I liked to include her artwork here. She's quite talented. This picture doesn't quite do it justice, but in person, this painting is luminescent. It's beautiful. The goal here and what we hope to accomplish. There's not enough time to do this particular discipline justice. Just like with philosophy, we could talk about philosophy for years, but here's what I hope that we can do with this art and the aesthetics. Learn what makes a work of art a masterpiece, what makes it objectively good, what makes it classic, what makes one work of art better than another, even though that's highly subjective. If we don't like a piece of art, how can we find a way to still appreciate it? Okay, it's the same thing with like film or music. There are songs or musicians that I can appreciate as far as their artisanship and their musicianship, but I may not actually listen to it on my own very often. Right? Can we make connections between historical events, philosophical movements, and other humanities disciplines, and how they influence art and vice versa? And then obviously what it means to be human. How do we learn about the human experience through visual art? We start with art appreciation because understanding art's origins, understanding the artist, him or herself, history, and historical time periods, all of that comes together to help us understand the role of art in the human experience. And ideally, we learn to articulate how art makes us feel, our personal response to art, and why it affects us that way, using the jargon and the terms from the discipline itself. Okay, so at the end of the day, this is about cultural literacy too. Okay. So, for example, it's one thing to say that I love the painting Starry Night, and I do. It's beautiful. But it's another thing entirely for me to be able to articulate to you why, on a personal level and on an artistic and analytical, critical level. So, his use of color, which is pretty, for its time, pretty new or novel or unique. The stark contrast of the warm gold of the moon with the more muted yellows that have a bit of green in them, the dark blue sky, the dim dark colors of the town, how angular the shapes are here and in the town as opposed to the landscape and the sky in the background, the creeping and crawling trees here that don't even really look like trees. And it becomes even more significant when we take a look at Van Gogh the man. Right? So if we can encapsulate all of this together, including the historical time period in which this art was created, and then Van Gogh's personal life and his biography, we come up with a holistic understanding in a cultural sense. Okay, so the three things that we consider when we study art and art history: the subject matter. So if we're looking at Van Gogh, what is he painting? How do we know, and why is that significant? Style, the formal analysis. And when I say formal, I don't mean like formal versus informal. I mean analysis of the form. How does this piece of art fit within its particular genre or movement or time period? Or does it signify a shift into a new era? And then the context. So looking at the cultural implications, the situation that's happening contextually. Why or how does that particular time period influence the art that is created? Okay, so subject matter, style, and context are the three components of art appreciation and art history. And remember that we're doing this in the philosophy unit because really what we're doing is engaging in the philosophy of the aesthetics, right? The pursuit of and the study of beauty and how it manifests in what humans create. Okay, so here, subject matter. On the left, we have Georgia O'Keeffe's Jack in the Pulpit, number 4. It's oil on canvas. On the right, we have that same flower from a photograph, uniquely shaped plant native to North America. So the literal subject matter. And this is not exactly realistic, but it's not exactly abstract, but we can look at it and kind of glean that it is a flower, right? But here, sorry, I have to keep moving my face around. The subject matter of an abstract piece of art is a little bit harder, okay? So abstraction, which is a definitive characteristic of abstract art, because that's why we call it abstract, makes the subject matter harder to grasp, but it's still there. So on the right, what is it? It's called Bottle of Suzette, although I could be pronouncing that wrong, whatever. Okay, so we know it's a bottle, and we know what the bottle's called. And this is a mixed media piece of art, which means it has various types of media or content making it up. And it's by Picasso, whose name should be familiar to us. It's a bottle of wine on a table. And what abstraction is all about is boiling down an object to its most basic geometric shape. Okay, and we'll touch more on that in a bit. Okay, but if we're looking at a piece of abstract art and we're wanting to sort of give it a critical eye, we have to determine its subject matter, just like we did with the O'Keeffe painting. There's another, this is an example of the process of abstraction. Okay, and I find this so interesting. I don't know why. But we take like the physical form of this cow, okay, and we sketch it realistically, or rather, Theo van Doesburg does. Okay, and then we take it to the next step of abstraction, which is analyzing the types of shapes that are present in the realistic representation of this cow. So like he's taken the little triangles here, he's broken it down into squares, so quadrilaterals and triangles. Then he takes it a step further and simplifies it even more and adds contrasting colors. And then we have the fully abstracted concept where all of the elements are even separated from one another. And that argument is like, this is what constitutes the real world. We can boil everything down to a bunch of quadrilaterals of varying shapes and color. That's abstraction. Okay, what about here? We talk about subject matter. Subject matter here is cows and squares. What about here? This one's a little bit easier at a glance, but there's a lot to this painting. So we know right off the bat, George Washington, first of all, it tells us right here, but we recognize George Washington. As Americans, we understand. He's the founding father of our country, the first president, right? He's on our money, for goodness sake, okay? It's a cultural giant. So we know right off the bat, we look at this, why is this significant? Because the subject matter itself is significant. It's George Washington, okay? This is from 1796. It's a portrait, so obviously George Washington stood for this, which is crazy if you think about it. Now let's analyze it. How does he appear? How is he standing and how is he posed? So subject matter, we've identified it. Now we're analyzing it. What is he wearing? What else is in the room? What colors do we see? And why is he posed there? Why are those particular objects there? What purpose does this portrait serve? What is the message? Okay. So, if we could zoom in here on this screen, it would be better. So I'm going to pause it really quick and I'm going to pull up a better version of this. All right, so Wikipedia never fails me. So we're going to look at this one, okay? And let's see what he's got here. He's got a sword. Those nice little buckled shoes. Some books, because of course he's a learned man. Something here. A quill. Tassels. Looks like some clouds. Red. Red, 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 like a maroon. There's a rainbow. So at a glance, those are some things I noticed. He's clad in something very dark. Okay, so probably a black cloak of some sort. He's got his fancy little powdered wig, all that jazz. Okay. So, we need to consider the iconography that's there. We saw a rainbow, we saw a sword, we saw the American flag, we saw a quill. So there are visual clues that are relaying some sort of message to us through this art. It's more than just a portrait, because presidential portraits serve a purpose. In fact, they put a lot of thought into what is captured in a presidential portrait, even of presidents today. Portraits were supposed to communicate something about the person being represented and his or her place in history. So if we look at a picture of our painting of a king, King George III, who we should know as the man who pissed off Americans enough that we started the Revolutionary War, which ultimately led to George Washington becoming president, we see that he is posed in a very similar way. And he's looking off in the same direction. Okay, so this is not on accident. He's saying something about President George Washington here in conjunction with King George III. If we look at a close-up of, I believe, so this is a close-up, I had to pause and restart, of the image in the George Washington painting, okay, and it's more detail, so we could see some of the filigree and the eagle that's right here, okay, and then we see his sword and his finger, right? So, there's a message here, so pause this video and think about what that message might be, and jot it down, okay, if we consider the similarities here. The color red, right? So pause it, brainstorm, and then I'll show you what I came up with. Okay, I apologize if you hear Finn whining in the background, but here we are. So this is basically what we know about the painting, okay? So Stuart painted Washington from life, showing him standing up, dressed in a black velvet suit with an outstretched hand held up in an oratorical manner. So he's giving a speech, which could be characterized as commanding and yet stern, yet open and inclusive. There are two Doric columns with another row to the left. Wrapped around and between the columns are red tasseled drapes. His suit is plain and simple, and sword that he holds is a dress sword, not a battle sword, symbolizing a democratic form of government rather than a monarchy or military dictatorship. In the sky, storm clouds appear on the left, while a rainbow, which is covered here, appears on the right, signifying the war giving way to peace and prosperity of the new United States. All of that from a piece of art.